Elliot adjusted his tie in the reflection of his phone screen, more out of habit than necessity. He had no intention of loosening up tonight, even though he knew the gathering demanded a different energy. The bar buzzed with music and chatter as his co-workers crowded around a long table, their laughter rising in bursts. He hesitated near the entrance, scanning the group until he spotted Liam at the center, naturally commanding attention. Liam was everything Elliot was not, uninhibited, magnetic, and unapologetically confident. It wasn't just his wide smile or sharp cheekbones. It was the way he owned a room without trying. For weeks, Liam had teased Elliot, calling him the company monk for his unshakable professionalism. Now, seeing Liam with his sleeves rolled up, a drink in hand, Elliot felt out of place but couldn't retreat. "Elliot, you finally made it." Liam's voice cut through the din as he waved him over. A dozen eyes turned in Elliot's direction, their warmth mixed with curiosity. He forced a polite smile and joined the group, settling into a seat far enough to observe but close enough to participate. The night unfolded predictably. Rounds of drinks, exaggerated stories, and increasingly risque jokes. Elliot kept the sips of his whiskey, nodding along politely but offering little. His co-workers had long since written him off as the stoic one, a role he accepted to avoid unnecessary attention. Yet, he couldn't ignore the occasional glances from Liam, quick, deliberate, and edged with something that made Elliot's stomach tighten. Halfway through the evening, Liam clapped his hands together and announced, "Time for a game." The group groaned and cheered in equal measure, already tipsy enough to abandon any inhibitions. Liam's choice was a twist on truth or dare, where losing a round of trivia meant facing a dare chosen by the group. "Come on, Elliot," Liam teased, pointing a finger at him. "Even monks need to have a little fun." "I'm not a monk," Elliot replied evenly, though his tone lacked conviction. "Prove it, then," Liam challenged, his grin widening. The group echoed Liam's encouragement, and before he could decline, Elliot found himself dragged into the game. The first few rounds passed without incident. Elliot managed to avoid any dares, answering trivia questions with his usual precision. But as the alcohol flowed, the dares became bolder and the stakes higher. It wasn't until Elliot misidentified a pop culture reference, a movie Liam had quoted countless times, that he realized he'd finally lost. "Oh," Liam said, leaning back with a mischievous gleam in his eyes. "What should we make our dear Elliot do?" Suggestions flew around the table, ranging from harmless to outrageous, but Liam silenced them with a single declaration: "He has to kiss me." The table erupted in laughter and gasps. Someone whistled, while others chanted for Elliot to comply. His heart raced as he stared at Liam, searching for an out. "That's not necessary," Elliot began, his voice calm but strained. "Rules are rules," Liam interrupted, his tone light but his gaze intent. "Unless you want to chicken out." Elliot's mind scrambled for a response. His relationship with Mark flashed briefly in his thoughts, a sturdy but increasingly distant presence in his life. Mark wasn't here. It was just a stupid game. Harmless. The crowd leaned in, the room thick with anticipation. "Fine," Elliot said, his voice low enough to almost drown under the noise. Liam's grin softened into something unreadable as he leaned forward. The kiss was quick, barely a second, but it was enough. Enough for Elliot to notice the warmth of Liam's lips, the faint taste of whiskey, and the electricity that shot through his chest. The group exploded into cheers. Breaking the moment, Elliot pulled back, his face flushed, while Liam casually returned to his drink, as if nothing had happened. "You did good, monk," Liam quipped, his voice carrying only to Elliot. "Maybe losing isn't so bad after all." Elliot laughed nervously, his throat dry, and excused himself to get another drink. As he walked away, he felt Liam's eyes on him, steady and unrelenting. At the bar, he gripped his glass tightly, replaying the kiss in his mind despite himself. It wasn't supposed to feel like this, a mix of confusion and exhilaration that unsettled him deeply. It wasn't just a kiss. It was the way Liam looked at him afterward, like he'd just uncovered something Elliot hadn't meant to show. He finished his drink and decided it was time to leave. On his way out, he caught Liam's eye again. This time, Liam didn't smile or speak. He simply held Elliot's gaze, a silent dare hanging in the air between them. Outside, the cool night air hit Elliot's face, grounding him momentarily. He checked his phone, a message from Mark, reminding him to pick up groceries tomorrow. The normalcy of it felt distant, almost foreign. As he walked home, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The kiss was meant to be meaningless, a joke at his expense, but it lingered. And the worst part was he didn't want it to go away. Elliot pausing at his apartment door, hand hovering over the handle, a knot of guilt and curiosity tightening in his chest. He knows he should forget about it, but a quiet voice in his head whispers, "What if you don't want to?" Elliot sat at his desk, staring blankly at the spreadsheet on his computer screen. Numbers and formulas blurred together as his thoughts drifted for the 100th time that day. He clenched his fists, willing himself to focus, but it was futile. The kiss had taken root in his mind, blooming into something he couldn't ignore. Liam's laugh echoed across the office, pulling Elliot from his haze. He looked up to see Liam leaning against a colleague's desk, his charm in full display as he gestured animatedly. Their eyes met briefly, and Liam's smile flickered into something more personal, subtle but unmistakable. Elliot quickly looked away, his pulse quickening. It had been 3 days since the kiss, and Liam hadn't brought it up directly. Yet his presence was louder than ever. The casual flirtation, the lingering glances, the way his shoulder brushed against Elliot's in passing. It all felt deliberate, like he was testing the waters. Elliot told himself it was nothing, that Liam was simply being Liam. But his body betrayed him, drawn to Liam in a way that made him feel unmoored. Every interaction with Liam left him buzzing, a dangerous mix of guilt and exhilaration. By lunchtime, Elliot couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his jacket and stepped outside, hoping the crisp air would clear his head. As he leaned against the building, his phone buzzed in his pocket. "Liam, want some company?" Elliot's breath hitched. He glanced around, half expecting to see Liam watching him, but there was no one. His thumbs hovered over the keyboard before he finally typed, "Elliot, I'm just taking a break." The reply came almost instantly. "Liam, I could use a break too. Meet me by the cafe across the street." Elliot hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to decline. But the memory of the kiss, the pull of something he couldn't name, overpowered his better judgment. The cafe was quiet, a stark contrast to the noisy office. Liam was already seated at a corner table, a cup of coffee in hand. He looked up as Elliot approached, his smile soft but charged with an undercurrent of something unspoken. "I was starting to think you wouldn't come," Liam said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "I wasn't sure if I should," Elliot admitted as he sat down, his voice low. Liam tilted his head, studying him. "And yet, here you are." Elliot looked away, his fingers tightening around his coffee cup. "What do you want, Liam?" Liam leaned forward, his tone dropping to something almost intimate. "I want to know if you've been thinking about it as much as I have." Elliot's stomach twisted. "It was just a game," he said, though the words felt hollow. "Maybe for everyone else," Liam said, his gaze unwavering. "But not for us. Don't tell me you didn't feel it." The air between them thickened, charged with the weight of everything left unsaid. Elliot wanted to deny it, to push Liam away and bury the memory of the kiss. But the truth sat heavy in his chest, undeniable. "I don't know what you're talking about," Elliot said finally, his voice trembling. Liam chuckled, not unkindly. "You're a terrible liar." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Elliot avoided Liam as much as he could, but his presence lingered like a shadow. By the time he returned home, he was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Mark was waiting for him in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. "You're late," he said, glancing up. "Sorry," Elliot mumbled, setting his bag down. "Busy day." Mark smiled faintly and returned to his task. "How about a glass of wine? You look like you could use one. Elliot nodded, grateful for the distraction, but as they sat down to eat, he found it impossible to focus on the conversation. Mark's words faded into background noise, replaced by the memory of Liam's voice, his touch, his gaze. "Are you okay?" Mark asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Elliot forced a smile. "Just tired." Mark reached across the table, his hand warm and familiar. "You've been distant lately. Is everything all right?" Guilt stabbed at Elliot, sharp and unrelenting. "I'm fine," he said quickly, pulling his hand away. Mark hesitated but didn't press further. As the evening wore on, Elliot retreated into himself, overwhelmed by the weight of his secrets. The next morning, Elliot arrived at the office early, hoping to avoid Liam. But Liam was already there, leaning casually against Elliot's desk. "You're persistent," Elliot said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Only when it's worth it," Liam replied, his smile slow and deliberate. Elliot sat down, keeping his gaze fixed on his computer. "I'm not sure what you're expecting from me." Liam shrugged, his voice light, but edged with something darker. "Maybe I just like seeing you squirm." Elliot's jaw tightened. "This isn't a game." "Exactly," Liam said, his tone softening. "That's why it matters." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The office buzzed around them, oblivious to the storm brewing in their quiet corner. "I can't do this," Elliot said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Liam leaned closer, his breath warm against Elliot's ear. "You already are." The word sent a shiver down Elliot's spine. He closed his eyes, wishing he could shut out everything, Liam, the kiss, the feelings he couldn't control. But when he opened them, Liam was still there, watching him with a mix of amusement and something deeper. That evening, as Elliot walked home, his phone buzzed again. "Liam, I meant what I said. You don't have to fight it." Elliot stared at the screen, his heart pounding. He knew he should delete the message, block Liam, and move on. But instead, he found himself reading it over and over, the words etching themselves into his mind. By the time he reached his apartment, he was no closer to a decision. The temptation was unbearable, the line between right and wrong blurring with every passing moment. As he unlocked the door, he hesitated, his hand trembling. Mark was inside, waiting for him. But so was the memory of Liam's kiss, a fire that refused to be extinguished. Elliot standing at the threshold, caught between the life he knows and the one he can't stop imagining. Elliot stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, his fingers gripping the edge of the sink. His shirt collar was loose, his hair slightly disheveled, and his face pale under the fluorescent lights. He hardly recognized himself. Somewhere along the way, the careful, controlled version of Elliot he had always been had unraveled. The night before, he'd met Liam at his apartment. He told himself it was just a talk, to clear the air and finally put an end to whatever this was. But the moment he'd stepped inside and seen Liam standing there, his shirt half unbuttoned, his eyes alight with a mixture of longing and triumph, all rationality had dissolved. It had started with a conversation, tentative, almost formal. "I shouldn't have come," Elliot said, his voice wavering as he lingered by the door. "And yet you did," Liam replied, stepping closer. His movements were slow, deliberate, as though he were giving Elliot time to walk away. "I don't know what I'm doing," Elliot admitted, his heart pounding in his chest. "You're doing what you want," Liam said softly, closing the space between them. Elliot tried to protest, but Liam's hands were already on him, warm, steady, and impossibly familiar. When their lips met, it wasn't like the kiss at the bar. This time, there was no audience, no laughter, no pretense. It was raw and consuming, a moment that stripped Elliot of every excuse he clung to. Now, standing in the office bathroom, the weight of his actions pressed down on him like a tidal wave. He splashed cold water on his face, hoping it would clear his mind, but it only made the guilt sharper. Back at his desk, he avoided Liam's gaze, though he could feel it on him like a physical touch. Liam made no effort to hide his satisfaction, his confidence only fueling Elliot's turmoil. The breaking point came when Elliot received a text from Mark. "Dinner at home tonight? I'll make your favorite." The simplicity of the message was devastating. Mark had no idea, no reason to suspect that the man he trusted implicitly was betraying him. Elliot's hands trembled as he typed out a reply. "Sounds perfect. See you at 7. That evening, Elliot sat across from Mark at the dinner table, the smell of roasted garlic and herbs filling the air. Mark had gone all out, preparing a meal that spoke to years of knowing exactly what Elliot loved. "You've been quiet lately," Mark said, pouring them both a glass of wine. "Work stressing you out?" Elliot hesitated, the weight of the truth sitting heavy on his tongue. He could feel the words bubbling up, threatening to spill over. But instead, he nodded. "Yeah, it's been a lot." Mark reached across the table, his hand resting on Elliot's. "You know you can talk to me, right? About anything?" Elliot swallowed hard, his guilt choking him. He managed a small smile and squeezed Mark's hand. "I know." But the lie hung between them, palpable and suffocating. The following week, everything unraveled. Elliot had been careless, leaving his phone unattended on the kitchen counter. A message from Liam flashed across the screen, innocuous at first glance but damning in its familiarity. "Missed you today. Can't stop thinking about last night." Mark saw it. Elliot entered the room just as Mark set the phone down, his face pale, an expression unreadable. "What's this?" Mark asked, his voice unervingly calm. Elliot froze, his mind racing for an explanation, but he knew there was none. The truth was there, plain as day, and there was no escaping it. "Mark, he trailed off, the words caught in his throat. Mark held up a hand, stopping him. "Don't. Just tell me the truth. Have you been cheating on me?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Elliot nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry." Mark closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of Elliot's confession had physically struck him. When he opened them again, his gaze was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "How long?" Elliot shook his head. It's not what you think. It just happened. It just happened." Mark's voice rose, trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "You don't accidentally cheat, Elliot. You made a choice." "I know," Elliot said, his voice breaking. "I don't know what's wrong with me. I never wanted to hurt you." Mark stared at him for what felt like an eternity before finally standing. "I need time to think," he said, his voice cold and distant. "I can't do this right now." As Mark walked out the door, Elliot felt a hollow ache settle in his chest. He had destroyed the one thing that had been steady and safe in his life. And for what? A fleeting moment of passion? Days passed in a blur. Mark stayed with a friend, leaving Elliot alone in their apartment. The silence was deafening, each empty room a reminder of what he'd lost. Liam texted, called, even stopped by the office, but Elliot avoided him. The thrill that had once drawn him to Liam now felt tainted, a constant reminder of his betrayal. One evening, Liam showed up at his door. "You've been ignoring me," he said, his tone a mix of frustration and concern. "I can't do this anymore," Elliot said, his voice firm despite the pain in his chest. "Whatever this was, it's over." Liam frowned, his confident facade cracking. I thought we had something." Elliot shook his head, tears brimming in his eyes. "You were an escape. That's all. And I let it ruin everything." For once, Liam had no clever retort. He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable, and walked away. A week later, Mark returned to the apartment, his demeanor calm but guarded. "I've thought about this a lot," Mark began, sitting across from Elliot at the kitchen table. "And I need to know if you want to fix this, or if you're just going to keep running." Elliot met his gaze, the weight of his guilt heavy, but a flicker of hope sparking in his chest. "I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." Mark sighed, his eyes softening slightly. It's not going to be easy. I don't know if I'll ever trust you again. I'll prove it to you, Elliot said, his voice steady. Two of them sitting in silence, the road ahead uncertain but not impossible. For the first time in weeks, Elliot feels something he thought he'd lost entirely: hope.